And there we are, live Energy podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the good doctor herself, Dr. Ellen Wald. Miss Wald, how you doing today?
It is a very busy, busy day. In fact, it started last night. Last night with the pipeline
Yeah, so we
calls.
were looking at this morning on the Text on Gas podcast, and it's if I got the timeline right, according to I think the New York Times, Fridays when they shut it down, Saturdays when they kind of came out publicly said, "Hey, this is something going on," and then like Sunday it feels like that's when all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
So and then I saw between this morning when we were recording on Text on Guest podcast, and and now that they've found who's hacked the pipeline, is that right? Is that the latest? Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's dark. What is it? Dark side?
It sounded like a comic book character. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and my favorite part was they're like the FBI is confirmed. It was dark side and it's on the dark web, and also they're like people are on like CNN they're saying it's a Russian group, but
Mm.
at least from the article that I read, it said that they don't know if this is a Russian group. It's just that they've never done any attacks against any former Soviet like satellite countries, which makes you think it could be Russia. But my personal absolute favorite thing was like where they're yeah, I gotta find this because I think I like saved it in my like um Twitter thing. I gotta find this because this was great. It was where they said that the hacker group blamed for this weekend's ransomware has insisted it only wanted to make money and regretted creating problems for society.
Yeah.
Which
So
leads
here's
some to is this the first ESG conscious cyber attack group?
ooh. So yeah, this is how NBC put it. The Dark Side Ransomware Group released a statement Monday saying that it is apolitical and that they did not mean to cause widespread disruption. So they only wanted to call localized disruption. They didn't want it to be widespread. Like localized.
So did they not do their research?
Yeah, like yeah, if you're gonna hack something, shouldn't you know exactly what you're hacking, why you're hacking it, what the goal is?
I mean, this is a pipeline that supplies 45% of the petroleum products
Yeah, it's a
to the East Coast. So you didn't think it was going to have a big effect? Did you not like were you looking to attack a smaller pipeline?
yeah, I don't know. I've wondered about that too. It's like that with this news, it's like, well, what was your goal? Because it makes me wonder if this we'll put the tinfoil hat on here for half a second. If the government, like, sent in like some CIA operative, like, look, guys, here you go. This is going to end bad for you. And so if that's why they've kind of changed their tune, because it is kind of a weird. I mean, I don't know what they were hoping for, but they want money, obviously, but I don't know. It's makes you wonder if there's something else going on behind the scenes where they're getting pressure to change their tune, because they haven't released it though yet, right?
Yeah, so this was the most interesting thing was the most recent update that the Colonial Pipeline provided on its update that they said, which was basically that they have a plan to restart. It seemed like something was definitely affected, and then they took everything offline to prevent I don't know, other things from being affected. So if I was when they said that, I was thinking back to the Aramco hit where they were like, yeah, but we took all of what was it, all of Upcake offline because like there was a fire in one place, and we took the whole thing out. We took all the oil, or no, they were like, we took all the oil, everything offline to shut down while we like evaluate. So it seemed like they took everything offline, and now like, okay, we have a plan to incrementally like resume service, but they didn't say like we paid the ransom and it's over, or we neutralized the threat, or like we moved everything to a new server and it's not like they didn't say anything like that. So some people were like interpreting this as, oh, they paid the ransom, and but I don't that's not the impression I got from what they said. But it seemed to say was like, we think we can bring it back online, we have a plan, but we have to like take it step by step.
Yeah, and I am so tech ignorant. I just wondered, is there like how like so I kind of compared this more to Y2K. Remember like Y2K, everyone's afraid of what would happen when we crossed over, and so trying to run these simulations and models. And something like this, I don't know what the potential threats are, but how do you know that there's no malware or Trojan viruses? Like how do you know that until you've actually gone live. I don't know. I'd love if we have an IT person that listens to the show. That'd be good.
Yeah.
No.
That would be super helpful. Yeah, I've been getting a lot of questions about that, and I've said, "Well, I'm not an IT person, so like I someone said to me, I think it was actually, so I'm going to be on BBC Radio after this to talk about it, and I was talking to the producer, in like a little pre-show discussion, and so he was saying, I picture like a guy with a giant wheel,
Mm-hmm.
like opening and closing the pipeline. I was like, well, it's a little more sophisticated than that. They have 4 lines, and different lines carry different products, and everything gets coordinated. And there's some of things go to different places, and there are offshoots, and so it all has to be the logistics all have to be managed. Plus, we have a lot of safety concerns, and you can't just you can't just like restart things without making sure that like all of the safety monitoring things are also back online. So it's much more complicated than just like open the taps.
Right, right. And I saw, let's see here, right before we got on, our favorite person, Big Orin, had a comment that I thought was, let's see here, let me see if I can find Big Orin. Where's he at?
We always love a comment from Big Orin.
Well, let's not get carried away here.
Okay, fine. We sometimes appreciate Big Orin's input.
That's getting closer.
When he has nice things to say about me in particular.
Big Orin is kind of like Trump. He's either gold or it's just a train wreck. It just kind of depends on which Big Orin.
I have a feeling he's not going to like that comment.
God, I hope he's watching right now. Okay. Just wondering how the Colonial Pipeline ever functioned without the internet. Amazing that such a critical yet simple piece of infrastructure can be so easily taken down and owners unable to do much. Not sh- not sure you need Skynet to defeat humanity. Just needed competent businesses. So there's your Big Orin take of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said this earlier, somewhere else, TD Ameritrade, I think I said, if this isn't a wake up call, then I don't know what is, because I mean, I think everyone needs to have contingency plans for this, and like it sometimes like amazes me, like, okay, you have to shut everything down, fine, but like to keep people in the dark for this long, like what the market opened Sunday night, and it was prices for what is it, the gasoline futures were really going up, and it's an issue. And I think I mean, one of the things that I was thinking immediately was, I was remembering back when Hurricane Irma was coming to Florida, and the governor of Florida, not the current governor, the previous one, told everyone to go out and buy gasoline like a week before the hurricane was going to come. And so everyone panic bought gasoline, creating more shortages. And then by the time they were getting more gasoline in, and they had to ship it via tanker by a truck everywhere, people were already trying to evacuate. And so it created this huge issue where people wanted to leave the state and couldn't get gasoline. So panic buying, I would say, is a huge issue in this. I would say it should be a big issue, but of course, like there's no hurricane coming. Like people could just sit tight. I think someone said on Twitter, they're like maybe it was gas buddy guy. Patrick Dehan, I'll forever call him gas buddy guy. Sorry. I think he said something like, like stay home to stay home to save the tankers or something. I was like, remember, stay home to save lives, or stay home to stop the spread. Well, now it's stay home to prevent panic buying. Like you can just stay home. Like it's not like, I mean, some people have to go places, like ambulances have to go places, and you want to have enough diesel for trucks and stuff, but like you don't have to. You can like wait a few days.
Okay, so this is from Natasha Bertrand. Who is a CNN White House reporter. This is from about 10 minutes ago. She says POTUS says definitely that he will be meeting with Putin, but does not announce the date or location. On the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, POTUS says, quote, so far there's no evidence from our intelligence people that Russia is involved, end quote, apart from the group being based there. And then her next tweet, this isn't a quote, so I'm assuming, okay, here it is. For that reason, though, Russia does bear some responsibility for the criminal group, POTUS said. So, if I'm following the logic here, if there's a criminal group in your country, you bear some responsibility for that criminal group.
Now that I feel like has much larger consequences. But are they really in their country, or are there surfers in that country, but they could be in a basement in Turkey or, in South America?
So
So is
according
it
to this, it says on the Colonial Pipeline ransomware, POTUS says, "quote So far, there's no evidence from our intelligence people that Russia is involved." End quote. And then she says, apart from the group being based there, for
uh,
that reason, though, Russia does bear some responsibility for the criminal group. POTUS said. So they're saying, according to her, that the White House is claiming that these people are based in Russia.
in Russia?
Um,
Okay.
and so there you go.
So can we officially blame Putin or not?
Well, I mean, Russia's meddling in our pipelines now, and so it's just gone. There went from elections to
Okay.
pipelines, and
And now they're meddling in our pipelines.
yeah,
Got it.
there you go.
Okay. So, but they're ESG hackers because they didn't actually want to harm society. They just wanted to make money and also make the point that gasoline is killing the planet.
They could have theoretically reduced the carbon footprint. It is possible. So should
Okay.
we applaud them?
Should we apply? Well,
I mean, if they reduce the carbon footprint, that's a net positive, right?
yeah, but any of those things, it's like China's just going to build another coal plant anyway, which we're going to talk about later in the podcast. So,
Yes, there we go.
so what do we think? What's our best assessment? Do we think that they're going to I mean, I'm thinking like this pipeline supplies jet fuel to Hartsfield Jackson Airport,
Mhm. Right.
directly. And apparently airports only have 2 to 3 days of jet fuel,
Mhm.
stores on site.
Mhm.
So is the airport going to get shut down?
So, yeah, my understanding was if the pipeline wasn't up and running by tomorrow, that's when you're gonna start seeing the really kind of logjam and implications. Of course, the closer you are to Texas, so I don't know how far Houston is from a drive. I don't know how far of a drive it is from Houston to Atlanta, 10 hours maybe, and how many trucks you'd have to take to replace the pipeline delivery there, but that's a lot easier than getting all the way to New York overnight, right? So,
Yeah.
the closer to
But New
Houston.
York has an extra reserve. They have some sort of gasoline reserve. Plus, New
Sure.
York can get gasoline from Europe, although that will take a lot longer. I don't know how long the drive from Houston to Atlanta is. However, I once had to fly from Atlanta to Houston, and
Mhm.
no, I had to fly from Atlanta to New Orleans, and the only way I could do that was to go through Houston,
Oh, that would
which
make
was
sense. Yeah.
productive.
So
But
it's a 12-hour drive from Houston to Atlanta, so it's not
But
short.
are there truckers? Remember, aren't we in a trucker shortage? Not a
Well,
shortage of
they
trucks, a
lifted the
shortage.
rules to allow them to drive more hours. If you saw that or not, the DEA or not DEA, whoever oversees that, DOT or whatever it was, changed the rules to allow them to drive more hours, the next few days or whatever. I will just say this, on a kind of a semi potentially serious note, like if you're shutting down a pipeline, the U.S. government will view that as attack of national, like on our national security, right?
They certainly should.
And so earlier, when I was saying, I suspect that maybe these guys are kind of getting a different read than they thought. Like, I think,
They were like, "Ooh, this looks shiny," and instead
yeah,
they're like, "Oh, great! Now we're international terrorists."
right. They walk outside. They're like, "Is that a drone up there? Oh boy." I suspect, and so I am curious to see what the response will be because whatever you think about warfare or anything, I think that the government would probably it would be weird, I would say, for Biden administration to not do much unless they turn it back over and like wipe the slate clean. They're gonna do something. But I'm saying if this continues and it's kind of a crippling thing for a week or two, yeah, I would imagine there's a drone strike involved at some point, or a Russian KGB operative sent over to finish the job. Right? You muted. You're still muted. Okay, I can't hear you. No, I think you pressed your thing down there. Now the screen.
Gosh darn
There
it.
you
I
go.
have two ways to mute myself, and I had apparently muted myself on one and then went and muted myself on the other. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, what I was saying was if someone's looking for an excuse to do something like that against Russia, this would certainly be a good show. Plus, apparently, we are now back in the paradigm where showing strength against Russia results in like good political points at home. Back to the old like Cold War paradigm of some sort.
So we'll do a little wager here. My wager is that Russia takes care of this. That's my wager. What's your wager?
My wager is that the U.S. takes care of it, but they might try to make it look like it's the Russians or someone else.
We didn't mention the Israelis. We should have. If there's betting odds on the Israelis taking care of this, go buy that ticket because it might be a long shot, but the Israelis want to take care of stuff like this for people too. So
they're like, "Hey, Israel, how are things looking for you there? You want to do us a favor?
You're already dealing with Iran. Just go ahead and take care of this."
Yeah,
I do think, for all the talk about the saber rattling between the U.S. and Russia, at the end of the day, the last thing Putin wants is a U.S. bomb dropped on somewhere, or U.S. commandos going into Russia and extracting someone. And I don't think it doesn't like the story is going to get to that, but however, the Biden administration could respond pretty strongly, saying, "Hey, listen, we can't have this." And what does it hurt for Putin to make some hackers disappear? Like he does that on Tuesday. This is a Tuesday for him, so I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I'm curious what the listeners think.
I think this is certainly an interesting story. I was preparing for like a boring week, and here we are with.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. So I was the Colonial Pipeline was out after Hurricane Harvey, right? In 2017. Yeah. So it was out for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, I want to say it was out for a little while, but it also is this the one that Buffett owns?
Yeah. Okay. So believe it or not, I actually looked that up right before the podcast. I did my work. Here are so it's a privately held company in Alpharetta, Georgia. It was originally founded by 9 oil companies in 1962, but today it's owned by 5 entities. CDPQ Colonial Partners LP, IFM US Colonial Pipeline 2 LLC, KKR Keats Pipeline Investors LP, Koch Capital Investments Company LLC, and Shell Midstream Operating LLC. So it's definitely got a Koch. We've got Shell. We've got KKR.
I thought Buffett owned one of those big pipelines for some reason.
He may. What is it? What's the other big one? It begins with a P, and I couldn't remember the name. It's like, is it Plantation? No, maybe I'm thinking like too much south here. Dominion here. Listener comes through. He owns the Dominion pipeline.
Don't give that listener any credit, please.
No,
don't. He's trouble. He's
all
trouble.
right.
He's trouble.
Anyway, this is a Koch pipeline.
Yeah. So Dominion pipeline. There we go. Okay. All right. Thank you, I suppose, Mr. Samuels, for your contribution to the show, despite my better judgment. Yeah. Tip of the cap to you, sir. Okay. We touched on this briefly, but the prices are on the rise. I think that's going to be dependent on how far this goes.
Yeah, can we talk about something that happened to me earlier? Because I think that so I was talking to this on TDA Ameritrade Network, and they asked about like average price of gasoline, which is probably going up this summer anyway. And I know that they're saying like the national average is likely to hit $3. And the person was like, "Well, but it's already $2.96, which is basically $3." And I was like, "Okay, but that's where you are."
Right.
We're talking about it. She was like, "Well, could it get to like $4 or $5 a gallon?" And I was like, "Well, it could definitely get that high in some places, but we're talking about the national average." So, like, I don't know what's gasoline where you are, but where I am, it's like $2.70.
I think something like that. I think it was like $2.67, $2.73, or something like that. So, see, I told him you shouldn't have. We shouldn't have acknowledged him. That was a mistake.
Oh no. We opened the can.
We've opened the can.
So I just think it's important to understand that, like, when we talk about the national average, that doesn't mean gasoline prices where you are. It just means the average, and some places it could be really, really low. And so if it's like already $3, then yeah, it could go up to like $3.50 a gallon or more.
Right.
I think we're definitely going to see gasoline prices rise. It might, you should see an increase that will go back down when things get back to normal. Obviously, depending on how long the pipeline is out, the logistics get more and more difficult the longer it's out. It will take longer to resolve. The thing that I see is like it kind of like bleeds into summer driving season price increases, and so it
Exactly.
just looks like the price goes up. Whereas really, it's separate. They're separate mechanisms, but they all kind of
Right.
just bleed into one. And
So
I'm
so the
like
highest
making my hand motions.
the highest gas price for regular is $4.10 in California. Surprise, surprise. Beats out Hawaii. It's impressive that California's gasoline prices are higher than the islands. Just as an assist.
Yeah.
And the lowest is Mississippi's at $2.61. And then for diesel, the highest is Hawaii. They've got there at 4.22, and the lowest again is Mississippi at $2.78. So yes, here in Texas it's 2.66 is the average for gasoline. But to your point about summer driving, I was listening to some sports talk this morning, and they were talking about I think the Braves have full stadiums now, and they were talking about the hotels around the Braves stadium and how the rates are skyrocketing because people are coming down to go to the Braves games on the weekends. So they played the Phillies this weekend, and so they said they had a lot of people from Philadelphia or wherever from Northeast that drove or flew down to go watch the game. And so
Mhm.
you're not only are you going to have a summer driving season, you might have a increased spike because of kind of pent up demand or unique ways you can go experience something. So like here in Dallas Fort Worth,
Yeah.
they had the Canelo Alvarez fight this weekend. They had 70,000 people in AT&T Stadium for a boxing match. And so how many of those were locals? I don't know, but probably a lot flew in or drove in for that fight. And so I think you're going to see summer driving season, but also probably maybe a little bit more than normal just because people in the Northeast or wherever are still under some kind of mask mandate.
Mask mandates, quarantines. Yeah, and I agree, and I think that it's of course it's hitting the areas. There are certain areas that will be hit even more because like Atlanta is one of those areas that's particularly vulnerable from this colonial issue. Same with Tennessee, which is another area that's like totally open that people may be traveling to because it's open, and yet so it's interesting how that meshes up. I mean, people may be going down like to South Carolina,
Right.
North Carolina, and those places. Yeah, it's interesting. Florida is like parts of North Florida are on the Colonial Pipeline, but I think it's mostly the Panhandle, um, uh, and then the rest of Florida gets everything through Tampa, except for Jacksonville, which is on the other coast. But it is interesting how these things are shaking out, and I wonder though if the jet fuel aspect would be less bad simply because fewer people are still flying. And I did see something interesting about jet fuel that I did want to bring up, that when you're looking at the rise in passengers, so the way like we can look at TSA numbers to see how many people are getting screened by TSA and then extrapolate like
Right.
this is how many people are flying. Presumably you can't get through TSA if you don't have a ticket, so presumably you're not buying a ticket and then hanging out in the airport to eat airport food. So people who are getting screened by TSA are flying, and yet most of these flights are actually shorter flights than than previously. So people are flying, but they're flying, say, domestically or much shorter distances, and so that's not necessarily translating into the like resumption of typical jet fuel usage. So like, whereas they might fly to Europe, instead they're flying to like Chicago.
Yeah, or from New York or Philadelphia down to Atlanta. That's a short flight.
Yeah, it's
An hour and a half, 2 hour flight maybe.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty short. And then whereas like normally be like, oh hey, let's go to France.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I think that it's important when we're when you're looking at aggregate numbers, you can't say like, oh, okay, TSA is like 10% off of normal for this time of year, therefore jet fuel should be this. You're not going to be able to make that.
We almost need to measure it in two ways, I guess. Well, maybe just one way, but miles flown, right, would be kind of the biggest thing. Because if they're flying, so theoretically you could have less passengers, but as long as the miles that are being flown are the same, you're going to use the same amount of jet fuel. I mean, maybe a little bit less because it's lighter, but that's on the margins. But generally speaking, if we could track how many miles are being flown, that would be probably the best way. Now, the only way that would offset is if you had the amount of passengers that increased it, and you had more shorter flights to make up for that. But then the miles eventually would catch up. So probably miles flown would probably be the
Yeah, that would be the best measure.
best measure, I think, off the top of my head. Um,
Except that if planes are flying not full, then they're still flying the miles, even if the people aren't there.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So miles
Yeah,
flown would be the thing, right? So even if
yeah,
you had more people flying and they're flying shorter, eventually the miles would be the same as a long flight.
yeah.
So potentially, but yeah. So we shall see.
Yeah.
I do think that the airlines are going to, I haven't looked at airline ticket prices, but I did hear someone who flies quite regularly say that the prices are starting to get back to normal levels and whatnot, and planes are more full and stuff. So
My question is really, do you think how long will the no cancellation and no change fee thing last? Because if there's anything good that could come out of this, it would be like a relaxation of that rule, because that is like the most annoying thing about airlines.
the no cancellation.
Yeah, it's like you can't cancel, you can't change, and then like things happen, and it's really, really, or you have to like pay, so much more money to get a ticket that's changeable. I'm wondering if they'll like, just because of their like weird like COVID regulations or different country, they'll just kind of be like, okay, we'll just let we're like things that came about after the terrorist attacks were like the shoe thing and all these other things that have stayed. Like maybe we could keep one thing from this.
Fly Southwest. It's
No, Southwest is crazy. You cannot fly Southwest. Like they kick off like 2-year-old babies. You like seriously, not good.
Yeah, it's a crazy time. So as far as the cancellation thing, I'm a
Which is
little
totally
bit
unrelated to gasoline or oil prices.
no, but it is part of the habits and stuff like that, right? So if you're making it easier for people to fly and less risk, theoretically they're going to buy more tickets. That's kind of what you're trying to do, right?
Oh,
And so if you start putting those the check back fees and stuff, then you're making it more cumbersome. So I'm assuming that will be kind of how they determine it. I haven't looked at when's the last earning call for like Delta or whatnot? I haven't looked at that to see what they're saying
it
about.
should have been very recently. I mean,
Right.
are we still doing earnings calls? I know we just wrapped up oil companies like
Right.
Aramco was like last Monday, which is like the last one.
So this looks like when I just do a quick Google search 4 weeks ago, there's like a talk about it's going to happen, but 3 weeks ago, but I don't see. Okay, here it is. Signs of progress after another weak quarter. That's kind of the headline I'm seeing here. So looks like they're doing better, but probably not making a lot of money. So
So can we talk about one more Colonial thing before we head on to something else? Because I just saw this and I think it's interesting. There are a couple of interesting things. So first of all, there was just apparently there are reports this morning that Motiva Refinery, which is the largest refinery in the U.S., shut their crude oil units due to the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. Although apparently that was reported by MT Newswires, but apparently Bloomberg was saying that they had to shut units on Sunday because of power outages. So I was wondering if we'd heard anything about that, because I mean, if this is shut for a while and then the refineries keep making gasoline, they just put the gasoline into storage until it can be sent out. But if they're halting, production, if they're shutting their crude oil units, then that poses a backup
right.
into crude oil, which then could impact prices and imports and all of that. I was wondering if
I haven't heard
don't know.
interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Also, apparently, there some shipping companies said they booked 4 vessels to ship diesel or gasoline from Europe to the U.S. Atlantic coast, which is interesting. But it's going to take it's going to take a while. Like it's not going to get there for a while. Could we end up with a situation where the pipeline is fixed, everyone's getting their gasoline, and then suddenly like 4 tankers show up in Boston, New York, Delaware, wherever, with tankers full of diesel and gasoline, and we find ourselves with like a huge overhang?
Well, you remember the what's the ship that got stuck? The
Ever Given.
Ever Given, right? So there were ships that went around the south of Africa to try to like beat the traffic, And by the time they got it unclogged, it turned out that those ships going around were actually going to be behind if they would have stayed in line. And so I wonder if you'll have something like that. Like you're saying, like by the time this is resolved, you try to deploy all these measures to get the gas there, and like they just fire the pipeline back up, and it's like, nah, well, okay.
Yeah. Here. Well, now you got to take your European gasoline because.
So, okay. Speaking of China and firing up coal power plants, you said a minute ago. Let's get to that. China's greenhouse gas emissions exceed those of the U.S. and developed countries combined, reports say. So, this is an overly wordy headline, in my opinion, right? Like for the audience, could you maybe take a stab at what other developed countries combined might mean?
The U.S., Britain, everyone, all of Europe, the United States, Japan,
South Korea.
Yeah. Basically everywhere that's. Are we kind of, does Russia counts as a developed country now? So, okay, way back when in like the ancient years of like this, at the turn of the millennia, there we go, the turn of the millennia, when I studied environmental science, we had to do this unit on like population, and we had to learn like what the differentiation was. So there was the first world, which was the United States, the second world, which was the Soviet Union, and the third world, which was like everyone else. I'm not sure why like Europe didn't end up in the first world. Maybe it did. And then we learned that was a bad thing. And so now we divide everything into the developed world and the developing world. Except they were never quite clear where the Soviet Union fell in that, or the former Soviet Union fell. So is Russia considered a developed nation or a developing nation? I know that China and India are developing nations. So is there like a GDP cutoff?
So I heard the other day, and I want to talk about this actually in a second. We'll come back to this for the China discussion. But it was an energy podcast, and they were talking about China as the U.S. is a post-industrialized nation, and China is still an industrializing nation. I thought that's a good way to describe it. And his point, he was talking about manufacturing jobs and how those jobs aren't coming back to the U.S. because we're post-industrialized, and so our economies just move beyond that point, whereas China can still build an economy off of those kind of jobs. I thought that was an interesting way to describe it. I like emerging markets, and, developing, but yes, I would think.
BRIC, is that what we like to BRIC? Brazil, Russia, India, China.
So here's what the article says. China is now responsible for more than 27% of global emissions, which is the U.S., which is the second highest, accounts for 11% of the global total. India is responsible for 6.6%, edging out the 27 nations of the EU for 6.4%. So 6 and 6 is 12, and you got another one there, so that's 13, and then you got the U.S., so that's what, 24%? So you got 24% and 27%. So just over almost 60% there, right, between those two nations. Between those two nations, between those two groups, 51%. And so between China, the U.S., the EU, and India, you have 51% of the emissions. So that means the undeveloped nations of the world contribute to 49% of the emissions. Is that what they're saying? Which would include Russia, to your point, right? Did I do that right?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a problem. They should have included Russia in this, but because the undeveloped or whatever is like what, Africa?
Well, so you have all South America, all of Africa, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, all those places, North Korea.
I don't like the way North Korea. I don't like the way they do this. I think it's both like racist and classist and like all this stuff. I don't think it's a good way to differentiate between countries. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's very. Depending on the context.
It is not woke. Sorry. I was watching too much CNN at the gym this morning.
There you go. But let's just think about that for a second. If we're reading these numbers right, 51% of all the emissions come from EU, US, India, and China. That means that 49% of the emissions are coming from places that don't have vibrant economies. Sorry, Russia. But they don't have vibrant economies. Like that's like when you talk about 2050 and these emission standards and stuff like that, you got a long way to go. If you're saying that these developing nations, like Pakistan, has the third largest population in the world. right?
Yeah.
On
Good
here.
point.
And so that means that eventually they're going to surpass or be up there with India. And so I don't know. It's just
I think, well, I think, and this brings up a huge issue to me, which is like something I've kind of been like hammering around for a while, which is the fact that, okay, if the US is only responsible for 11% of the emissions, then like all of these crazy expensive things that they want to do are not going to actually have an effect on the global. This is a global thing. That's the idea. Like we're all in it together, and we have to, do things globally. So, like, if the U.S. cuts its emissions, that doesn't mean that it's going to like stop climate change or whatever. Assuming that you believe in all this stuff, the biggest thing we can do, I would say, is to help emerging, developing, industrializing, whatever ing you want to use, nations not use coal. Like I think like that is like if you want a winning strategy, it's to get them off of coal or so they don't start on coal because like India and China have a lot of coal and they use it and they're increasing their use of it, especially China. So if you really want to make a dent in global emissions, instead of being like, let's spend billions and billions of dollars getting rid of the natural gas hookups to residential and commercial buildings in the United States, why don't we spend billions and billions of dollars helping these other developing countries not rely on coal? Like, I mean, I know it's like it sounds like oh, but we have to do our part, and we polluted like in the 20th century, we were big polluters, fine, but that's done. Like, get over it. It happened. Move on. Solve the problem, and actually go for a solution that is workable. I think the issue is that, well, Americans don't get paid. There's no graft in
Mhm,
this other solution.
mhm. So to answer your question, I think it's tied to GDP and about the growth aspect. Is how they
Okay.
make determinations. But I don't think it's actually it is actually rigidly defined, but I could be wrong about that. Okay, so one thing, let me just take a little respite here. Saturday night, I was asked to go judge. It was like the North Texas Christian homeschool finals debate deal, and so it's like
Ooh.
North Texas, Oklahoma, and it's like the best of the best of the high school students, and they have a policy debate section, and they asked me to be a judge. I'm not sure why, but they did, and so I went to judge. And let me just say this: it was fascinating. It was good. It was great. It was better than any debate you've watched from any president or vice president you've ever seen. And they
Ooh.
debated actually EU immigration. And the negative side won, the affirmative side lost. But it was a good debate. It was like an hour and 45 minutes. As I watched that and I was judging it, I'm not saying that there couldn't have been better proposals from one side or whatever. The other affirmative could have made a better case. That's irrelevant. The point is, just watching that debate, it reminded me of how little debates we actually have about the issues that matter, right? And so you talk about how do we handle these problems, whether it's exporting coal or renewables or climate change. Like we don't really have these kind of long form. Again, I think it was an hour and a half they went for debating.
Wow.
Yeah, we started like 8 o'clock, done like 9:30. So at night, so it was a long deal. Just think about like when is the last time you saw a good, not bloviating debate, but a good debate on anything. And so that's the frustration with these topics is we can't even have these discussions. And to your point, it's like, well, should we send them coal or not? And I mentioned the podcast. And so the podcast was a US China energy talk. And one of the guys was arguing that the US does not have a set energy policy. And I have an interesting thought on that. What is your take?
Hmm. US don't have a set. I I'd love to hear what his points are because I can see that. I don't.
Okay.
I can.
Okay.
I think that's a that I could see constructing an argument around that we
Okay.
don't really have it. We have
Right.
like many energy policies that
Mhm.
coexist and often clash with each other.
So I do think that there's something to that, but also at the same time, we have seen the EPA used to to roll out energy policy through emissions or water standards stuff like this. We also couldn't export oil, right? And so it's kind of weird because we don't maybe have a top down energy policy like China would, but we also do have a lot of energy policy, but it's this kind of with spoken wheels at the term. I don't know, hodgepodge. It's just kind of
Yeah.
all over the place. I thought that was interesting. And
Well, okay, it's funny. So I actually wrote an article in a textbook about U.S. energy policy from like 1990 through the 2000s, or maybe something like that. So like I looked at like, okay, so what was energy policy in the 90s, and then policy during the Bush administration and the Obama administration, because it was like right to the end of the first Obama's first term. And the Bush administration actually had, like, they passed a big energy policy like bill, and they actually did have set energy policies.
Mhm.
Since then, like, and then there were some energy policies in the Obama's first term with that big, like Solyndra and all, with that big, American Recovery and whatever Act. But since then, there really hasn't been like an energy bill. Like Bush really did have an energy, like it was a big energy plan. That was when we started with ethanol and all of the renewable fuel standard, and that was a real energy policy. But I don't think we've really had much of an energy policy since Bush. I think that would be my argument in the debate if I was going to do
So,
debating.
yeah. I think it's kind of one of those things where, to your point, and to his point, I think on some level, you can say it and go, "It's true," but also I think it's if you start thinking about how the U.S. has handled energy issues, we have FERC, we have EPA, we have all these Department of Energy, all these different groups that handle stuff, and they can manage policy. The Army Corps of Engineers, we have all these things that are kind of managing energy policy that have a lot of executive oversight or control. So I thought it was an interesting comment. I'm not sure I would,
Yeah.
so
I think it's a really an interesting thing to debate. Like, I think it's great that kids or youth, whatever, are debating these issues, because goodness knows we sure aren't.
no doubt.
Someone should be.
Okay, so speaking of emissions, Biden's Paris Agreement commitment will be tough on Americans and ineffective. Dr. Ellen Wald, opinion
Yeah.
contributor to the Hill, and just so we know, the views expressed by contributors are their own and not the view of the Hill. So they disagree potentially with your piece here, which says what?
Yeah. What does it say? It basically says that, so according to the Paris Agreement, which we have apparently now rejoined, we need to submit something called an NDC, which is a nationally determined some contribution, which apparently, like, only the United States and like 3 other countries have actually submitted. Nobody else does. Apparently, our nationally determined contribution is like crazy. And if you actually look at what it would mean to actually fulfill it, it's totally, like, it would change the lifestyle of Americans drastically. So, for example, if nearly every new car and light duty truck sold in the next 8 years would have to be electric.
Two.
Yeah.
Ooh,
We don't even have
hard pass.
forget convincing people that they should buy these. We don't even have access to the raw materials to build these cars, and our power grids are insufficient to charge these
Yes,
vehicles.
even if
So,
we imported them all from China today,
yeah,
we had everyone got like Oprah. You get a car, you get a car. It's one of those deals.
yeah,
We couldn't charge them.
yeah.
We just couldn't charge them,
You'd be charging them off of like your generator that runs on gasoline.
and we won't be able to charge them 8 years from now. So I think,
Yeah.
oh gracious.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. It's like it puts it into like terms that we can grapple with. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
Here's another one. Okay. Half of all residential buildings and half of all commercial buildings that are currently heated with natural gas, heating oil, and propane, which, by the way, propane is a very clean burning fuel. So, would need to be converted to electric heat. That the commercial side of this would be 1.4 million buildings. So think about that. So
Yeah.
not only are we going to put all the cars on the grid, we're
Right.
now going to put all these more buildings on the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we're saying go away all coal power plants. So basically, in my estimation, this leaves, unless we like build a huge number of nuclear power plants extremely quickly, then we're going to be in the cold and the dark.
Well, it might be just what we need to kind of realize what we're what we're
Which is
doing.
why, keeping in mind that in 2020, China brought online 38.4 gigawatts of new coal fire power and currently has 247 gigawatts of coal power under development. So I just think it kind of brings home like what exactly are we doing and why are we doing it and what's the point?
Okay, can we talk about this for half a second? Speaking of what are we doing at the point, Bill Gates and his wife are getting a freaking divorce.
Love is dead. The institution of marriage has failed. I mean, right? That's the message there.
They're and she is on a private island hanging out, or she was last week, according to the reports. So,
wait, is that like Jeffrey Epstein's island, but for women?
Dr. Walt,
sorry.
Shots fired.
I mean, when someone says private island, like that's where my mind goes.
So, according to the headlines, and I haven't read much of the stories, I've just kind of followed the headlines. Melinda Gates had concerns over Bill's possible ties to Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh, that's why my mind went there. Okay, I knew there was some Jeffrey Epstein connection.
Yeah,
all right,
but they've been working on this divorce since 2019. Again, just reading the headlines, haven't really dug into it.
It's like the longest divorce. This is like, I'm sorry, is this like conscious uncoupling?
Right. Well, but here is the dude who just bought what did we say last week? A $40-something million place in San Diego.
Yeah.
His wife is on a private island, or ex-wife, or whatever she is, soon to be ex-wife, on a private island when the news is announced. Like Mr. Carbon Footprint himself. Like his emissions, my family, I've got a wife and 4 kids. Our family will never even come close to his level of emissions.
I know. I think they should, but like, don't get divorced. It's bad for your emissions imprint. Like marriage, it's good for your carbon footprint.
There's gonna be 2 private jets flying around now, right? He's gonna fly. And so part of the,
and even if they're going to like the board meeting, the Gates family, they can't fly together because they're divorced.
So I promise you, in the divorce papers, there will be verbiage that says that Bill has to pay for her carbon footprint offsets. I guarantee it.
Oh my God. I please, can we please, I would love to see the first like carbon neutral divorce settlement. I'm going to file it with carbon neutral crackers. Hey, lawyers should advertise. Come to us for your carbon neutral divorce settlement. I mean, like the possibilities here. Like,
so I don't know.
People should start thinking about this.
I don't know what's going on with the divorce, what the impetus of it is, but the ultimate dig when you're separating from your spouse is to say the Epstein thing was too much. Like
we could have things, a resolution was possible, and
the Epstein,
that was just too much.
Like, how does Gates even argue that in court? Like, well, I mean,
everybody else was doing it.
I
wore a mask.
Oh. Might have worn a mask. Oh, good.
All right, we've like totally degenerated. Let's get back on track.
We've got like 3 minutes left, so let's.
All right, but we promise our listeners regular updates as to the carbon neutrality of the Gates family divorce.
Okay, real quick. OPEC plus crude oil production rises in April on surges from Iran and Russia. According to a Platts survey, it says that OPEC pumps 25.2. I cannot read. 25.28 million barrels per day. Non-OPEC allies add 13.21 million barrels per day. Iran hits 2.43 despite sanctions, the highest since May of 2019. No surprise here. That
number. I mean, like, wow.
It's a big number, but it's no surprise that Iran's over. It's like it feels like it's one of those stories we're finally now reporting. Iran actually over reporting, like, okay, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe you guys should report this all of last year too.
Yeah. Well, so they want to hit 4 for production, and they want to hit Iran. They want to hit 4 for production, and they want to hit 2.3 for exports. So they're not far off. I think that's the big takeaway from this is like
post quota is at 111%. I mean, I'm sorry, compliant. 111%.
Yeah, thank you, Saudi Arabia.
Well, and which, let's be honest, at summer driving coming up, it's probably a good time to be overproducing.
Yeah. Well, right? But I mean, Iran and Russia. I mean, I think, they're not overproducing. I mean, I think that says, it would be interesting to see what they do in when's their next meeting? End of May? I think it's the very end of May or the very
Yeah.
beginning of June.
Right.
So I think we're gonna see another. I wouldn't be surprised if they increase a little bit.
Okay. All right. A little bit of breaking news here. Before we go, NBC pulls out of airing the 2022 Golden Globes. So that's
Why?
probably because no one watches.
They're not carbon neutral enough.
Carbon neutral. So,
Those statues are going to be edible instead of gold. Or I'd like to see the statues made of recyclable material.
that was
Biodegradable.
on my Twitter feed. I don't know how that.
Biodegradable Golden Globe.
You know what you should do? You should get your carbon neutral cracker and submit them for the big swag bag they give out.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There you go.
A carbon neutral cracker baked at home.
Okay, Dr. Wold, where will you be?
Where will I be? That is an excellent question. I'm going to check my calendar to tell you. Later today, I am going to be on BBC World Service radio, and then again on their business radio, and I am also going to be on OAN, which is a new one. So,
there you go.
Yeah,
look at you
at 4:45 today.
Okay. All righty then, and everyone, to all the moms out there, I hope you had a wonderful Mother's Day this weekend, and I think Dr. Foreman should be on next week.
Ooh, wow, must be very, very busy.
Yes.
I can't wait to hear what he has to say about how this Colonial Pipeline thing impacts the. Well, I guess it doesn't really impact last month. And that was all your ESG freak news. I think we should have a reserved segment for like ESG freak news of the week.
Yeah, we should pay someone to do like the SNL skit, like the fake news. Weekend report or whatever, do like ESG report. So
yeah, all right. From now on, I'm going to submit your ESG freak article for consideration, and I will take your submissions and we'll feature one of them each week on the podcast.
So you can download the podcast, Energy Podcast, and submit your submissions to Dr. Ellen Wald on Twitter at Energized Economy. And with that, we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.